Do you get red after a sip of alcohol? Well, I do, and it actually has a name, the alcohol flush reaction. And in my case, the infamous Asian glow. But something I didn't realize is that Asian glow isn't just a cosmetic issue, it's a real health risk, linked to increased cancer risk and poor alcohol metabolism. Thankfully, Join is here to help, an AAPI and woman-founded supplement brand that was created to be the most effective natural solution to support people with alcohol flush and recovery, while boosting overall health. Made with clinically studied, all-natural ingredients like glutathione, milk thistle, and B vitamins, you can now finally feel confident when you drink. Get 20% off your first order at jointhefun.com. That's JOYNTHEFUN.com with the code FRANZ. That's FRANZ. Let's give the Asian glow a different meaning. What if a single cup of tea could hold a century of stories? Day Tea is a 5-generation family business crafting award-winning high-mountain oolong teas in Taiwan since 1918. Grown at the highest elevations, every leaf is hand-picked, all-natural, and nurtured without additives or herbicides. The result is an array of complex flavors that evolve with each steep, honored at tasting competitions in France and Japan. From premium loose-leaf and tea bags to ready-to-drink cold brew bottles, every sip is an invitation to slow down, savor, and connect. Discover tea as it's meant to be experienced. Use code FRANZ, that's FRANZ, for 10% off at daytea.co. That's DAETEA.co. Valid until February 14, 2026. Brew it hot, brew it cold. Take a moment for you. Hi everyone, welcome to another episode of the Friends of France podcast. I am so excited to introduce to you our expert guest for today. We have a very interesting story. We met almost 3 years ago in a land that you would not expect. I'm here with Dr. Raja, and just almost 3 years ago, we were in Syria together, right?
Yeah. I mean, I was really sad that I couldn't continue my journey with you guys, but we definitely had a fun 2 days in Damascus.
Yes, I will never forget that trip. Even up to this day, whenever someone asks me, it's like, what's your most favorite trip ever? And I'm always like, oh my gosh, Damascus. And everyone always, comes to me with like, what were you doing in Syria?
Yeah.
It's truly a story to be told. But today we have a very interesting topic and range of topics to talk about. And so, Dr. Raja, if you could first please introduce yourself to everybody. Thank you so much for joining us.
Of course. I'm excited to be here. So my name is, Annie or Dr. Raja, and I am an emergency room physician practicing in the South Bronx in New York City. And I have been an ER doctor, I guess, since like 2006 when I started my residency. So it's been a while. And then I further subspecialized in medical toxicology, which was a fellowship I trained in for 2 years. And I did that in Pittsburgh at the University of Pittsburgh Medical Center.
Yay. Yeah, medical toxicology, it was one of those subspecialties that I never knew was under emergency medicine, even though obviously it makes sense. I'm curious, what led you into, I guess, medicine in general, and then specifically emergency medicine, and then medical toxicology?
Medicine in general wasn't my path. I actually wanted to be a lawyer, and I applied to law school and took my LSATs. But then my dad was very, first generation kind of children in America, was very hell-bent on one of his children being a doctor. And my older brother, who wanted to be a doctor, then all of a sudden decided to drop the path. And my dad was like, hey, I think you're going to have to go to medical school. And I'm like, excuse me? So then I had to change my whole path and take my prereqs and all of that. So I kind of accidentally got into the field. But I will say emergency medicine, that was not my plan. I thought I was going to do internal medicine. I was planning to apply for internal medicine, but part of my internal medicine kind of workup, they suggested that I rotate through the emergency room just to get an idea of where I would spend a lot of my time, as an IM resident. And when I went to the emergency room, the ER doctors that were there asked me how I could be doing internal medicine, because they were like, you are exactly what an emergency medicine personality is. You have to do emergency medicine. And so then I switched to that. And then regards to toxicology, when you do emergency medicine resident, you normally rotate rotate. Toxicology is one of the core rotations that a lot of programs have, and you rotate through a tox center or poison center. And I thought it was very fascinating. I thought they were very smart. They knew their stuff. And I just thought it was an interesting topic. And I decided to do my fellowship in that. And here we are.
Yeah, very interesting indeed. I mean, first off, with emergency medicine, I just love how everyone is so different because I don't think I could ever do emergency medicine, even in nursing. I'm like, I think I will get a stroke if I'm ever working in the emergency room. And
Intense.
Intense for sure. And funny enough, during our first season, when our first few guests was Dr. Calvin's son, a good friend of
who
ours,
I know as well.
Who we know as well because we were also in Syria with him.
Yes.
Well, I wanted to talk more about the crux of our topic today, which is medical toxicology, which is such an interesting field. For those who may not know, what is the field of medical toxicology about? Like, how would you explain this to a stranger?
Okay, so MedTox is a subspecialty of emergency medicine, but sometimes you can do it through internal medicine or family medicine, and it basically deals with the harmful effects of substances on the human body. It's a specialized field of medicine that focuses on diagnosis, management, and prevention of poisonings and other health effects caused by drugs, chemicals, occupational, like say you work for a company, a lot of times they have an occupational toxicologist on board to screen the workers, and environmental toxins, things you're exposed to, biological agents of warfare, which is more scarier, and it just encompasses all of that. So it's like clinical medicine, pharmacology, pathology, environmental, all encompassed into one. And after residency, basically, you apply for a fellowship in MedTox and you have to go through the match. And then you get into a program and it's a 2-year fellowship. The field is ABEM certified, which is the American Board of Emergency Medicine. And you have to sit for the boards. And let me warn everybody, they're not easy. They're very hard, but you have to sit for the board. So obviously when you get boarded in MedTox and you're already boarded in emergency medicine, you're double boarded basically. So they're basically experts in drug overdoses, poisonings. You know, we're talking about normal things like Tylenol, aspirin, opiates. That's a big thing in America these days. Adverse drug effects, interactions, you know, herbs, dietary supplements, heavy metals. People love to talk about like arsenic and mercury in the fish and all these things. So it encompasses everything about that.
Yeah, I mean, it's super intriguing, right? That there is a much needed, obviously, subspecialty within these topics. As a toxicologist, I'm curious, what is the most either bizarre, interesting, or a creepy case that you've ever dealt with? Because when I think of MedTox, I think of it like, I feel like I'm watching a movie whenever I hear these stories.
Yeah. Detox is, you know, it's so crazy because you just kind of go up to a patient and be like, wait, what did you drink? And what kind of herbal tea did you make? I think the most interesting case was a case of strychnine poisoning, which you'll never see. And it's from this pesticide that prevents like gophers from eating your vegetables. It's called Gopher Go. And strychnine, you look like you're having a seizure, but you're totally awake. It's rapid and fatal muscle convulsions. And there's no antidote. It's just like, you know, supportive care, which is most of toxicology is all supportive care. And if there's an antidote, you give the antidote. So I thought that was quite interesting. There was one actually very famous case when I was in training in Pittsburgh about a neurologist who actually was poisoned by her husband, but nobody knew that until afterwards. And she ended up being poisoned by cyanide. And that was a very, you know, bizarre case of, you know, and a very zebra diagnosis, but that they happened to kind of think about from the emergency room. So they sent the appropriate tests and the levels, and they never in a million years thought they would come back elevated. And it did. So then the case was ruled a homicide and they had to investigate. And turns out the husband killed his wife with cyanide.
Yeah, I feel like the field of MedTox is really like a lot of unveiling of dramas, right? It's
major dramas. It's all drama all day. You know, even like Poison Center in New York, you know, like poison toxicology labs, they were created because the mob or people were killing people with poisons, right? But they had no way to prove that. So they were like, okay, let's just try to like see if we can identify these post-mortem in bodies and try to relate it to murder or homicide rather than like, you know, I just found my wife and she was just having seizures. And that became like, okay, we now know your wife has been poisoned. And that's how toxicology even got established in New York City, like the Bellevue Tox Lab. lab and the history of that. There's a very fascinating book actually for your readers if they want to read it. It's called The Poisoner's Handbook, and it goes through the whole history of all of that.
Wow, you're literally the Sherlock Holmes of the medical world. I love it.
We try. I mean, ER helps with that, right? Because
Yeah.
you're kind of an investigator whenever you
Yeah.
do emergency medicine.
Yeah, I will never forget when I was speaking with Calvin as well during our first season. He was telling me about emergency medicine residency. He's like, it's training you to be like a Jedi, where you just look at someone and you already know what's going on. This is reminding me of
I tell people all the time that I would have been an amazing detective because the amount of detective work you have to do in the emergency room is insane. You know, you don't know their name, you don't know what their background, you don't know their medical problems, and you kind of just work backwards with what you have, which is essentially nothing.
Yeah. Well, I wanted to talk more about this area of poisoning. Is there a difference when someone says that something is toxic versus something is outright poisonous?
Yes. So, you know, there's a very famous saying that says the dose makes the poison. So it's attributed to Paracelsus, right? It's basically like it's the dose that makes the poison. So you could take something in a small dose and it's not poisonous, but then you overdose it and now it becomes a poisonous substance. So it just means that any substance can be harmless or harmful depending on the amount and the circumstance. Like even water or oxygen can kill at very high doses, right? So toxic is the potential to cause harm. So any substance that can cause harm when absorbed, inhaled, injected, ingested. So toxicity is a property of that substance. For example, mercury is toxic. You know, a drug is toxic. So it refers to the ability to cause damage, not necessarily how the exposure occurred. Whereas poisonous is capable of causing harm when touched, when eaten, when ingested, something that releases toxins. So it delivers a toxin passively, like through eating or touching, like often used for plants and animals that can cause harm through contact and ingestion. You know, for example, poison ivy or the pufferfish, you know, fugu, right? It's like deadly to eat unless you have it prepared by a specialist who has like rigorous training. Mushrooms, right? Poisonous mushrooms. So the poison dart frog. So these are poisonous versus toxic.
When it comes to poisoning, what are the most common agents, especially within the, I guess, clinical setting?
The most as an ER doctor, I would say, is opiates. You know, opiates, then you get Tylenol and then aspirin, and then the cardiovascular drugs. You know, a lot of elderly people are on beta blockers and calcium channel blockers. So things that people have around the house, whether prescribed them or not. And then obviously you have children that get into these things as well. And they require a much smaller dose to be poisoned, right? So when it comes to kids and accidental exposures, household chemicals, caustics, bleach. Teens, you think of like intentional overdose, recreational drugs, and then environmental, you think of carbon monoxide. So these are kind of the most common things, but I would say Tylenol or opiates would probably be the most common I have encountered. And, you know, Tylenol overdose is the number one cause of liver damage in the United States.
There are trips, and then there are experiences. Imagine a journey where beauty meets meaning. Your K-Beauty Tour is a 7-day, privately curated immersion in South Korea, blending Korean skincare expertise, holistic wellness, and cultural depth, from the trend-setting beauty districts of Seoul to the serene beaches of Busan. Personally hosted by leading beauty and wellness content creator and my dear friend, Daniel Oh, this experience offers access you simply cannot get on your own. From palace courtyards where empresses once prepared their skin with hand-ground herbs, to private aesthetic consultations, bespoke color analysis, exclusive spa therapies, and blue ribbon level dining. With intentionally limited spaces for May 10 to 16, 2026, this is beauty elevated to ritual, where skincare becomes ceremony and travel becomes something unforgettable. Visit yourkbeautytour.com to learn more and reserve your place. How do you know when something actually tastes good to an Asian person? When they say, it's not too sweet. And that's precisely what Wild Mannered set out to do. Founded by two childhood best friends who were tired of drinks that were too sweet, too artificial, and left them with worse hangovers, Wild Mannered is an Asian American founded brand focused on bridging people together with all-natural, shareable soju cocktails. With flavors like strawberry basil, cucumber lime mint, and pineapple ginger, every sip is made with the real fruits and botanicals and perfectly balanced at a lighter 13% ABV. Refreshing, smooth, and never too sweet. Get 10% off your first order with code FRANZ, that's FRANZ, at drinkwildmannered.com, or hit the store locator to find them in stores across New York City. Make your next get-together a little more wild-mannered. Do you ever recall a time where you probably got a strange poison control hotline call?
Yeah, it was. So I don't know if this might be too old for you, but there was a very famous movie with Michelle Pfeiffer called White Oleander. I don't know if you remember that. This woman who was, I guess, accused of murdering her boyfriend with oleander. So I never even thought, like, who would ever do that? But apparently it's a very common cause of death in like Bangladesh and like these countries where they know. But when I was in the poison center in Pittsburgh, we had a very strange call of an old man who, from a case review of an older man who was depressed, and he made a slurry of oleander to kill himself, which is very toxic. And, obviously no amount of medication that they gave him, there's an antidote for that. It's like the same one for digoxin, basically.
Yeah.
But it didn't save him and he died. So I thought that was very strange. And I never thought that I would ever hear about a case like that.
Yeah, this sounds like literally straight from one of those TV series.
Yeah.
Of like a special episode edition of
like a house.
Yeah.
House MD,
House MD, yeah. How would you know that someone is poisoned? Like, how would you differentiate from just a mild reaction or even just an allergic reaction?
So that is kind of hard, right? An allergic reaction, technically, you might have like the IgE mediated response, maybe have hives or like itching or things like that. Poisoning is different. Like poisoning cases, a lot of times you could have mild poisoning, like even like aspirin in the elderly, when they're dehydrated, they can have a mild salicylism, which is the ringing in the ear. So, they're getting there, but they're not at the point of cardiovascular collapse, and so it could just be right at the brink of it, or, you're having seizures and confusion, collapse, and hemodynamically unstable. You're drowsy, your heart rate's low. So it would be more of a clinical presentation, right, of like your vitals and how you look and how you can participate in the exam. If you touch poison ivy and you get a rash to it, you obviously were poisoned by the poison ivy, but it'll go away, right? It's not going to be permanent. On a side note, there's also venomous, right? So there's toxic, poisonous, and venomous. And venomous is something that delivers a toxin via like a bite, a sting, a spine, like rattlesnakes, jellyfish, lionfish. So there's different levels, but I think it would be more based on a clinical picture.
Yeah, definitely. And if someone finds themselves in a toxic exposure emergency, what is the first thing they should do? I'm sure I've Googled this at like 2 a.m. and I can't sleep, and just me overthinking of possible life scenarios, and I'm like, just in case, what should I do?
I mean, if you are able to make a phone call and you're awake and alert, then you call the Poison Center, which is a national number. They have a mascot called Mr. Yuck, which ironically was designed in Pittsburgh. Every state, every region has a poison center, and every poison center has a toxicologist affiliated with it. And when you call them, everything is standard by protocol. So you're either speaking like to a nurse or a PA or somebody trained for protocols, but you could always escalate as a medical provider and ask to speak to the toxicologist on call, or if they have, if they have a toxicology fellowship program or whatnot. But yeah, Poison Center would be great, and they can guide you. If obviously somebody's unconscious, not breathing, life-threatening kind of exposure, you call 911. You don't call the Poison Center. Yeah. And you have to ensure your own safety first. Like if you see a bunch of people just dropping after they're going into like an enclosed space or something, you're just like, oh, let me avoid contact with any of this. Don't touch chemicals, get to some fresh air, move the person to fresh air, remove the source of exposure. If there's a gas exposure, move outside. If somebody ingests something or you ingest something, don't induce vomiting unless the Poison Center, advises you to. That's like the syrup of ipecac, which was like a very prominent thing that people used to have in their homes in case something like this. You can remove contaminated clothes. You rinse your skin, your eyes with water, for at least like 15 minutes. So these are the things you can do if you feel like you're getting some kind of reaction to something. But yeah, so it's either Poison Center or 911.
Yeah, this is so good to know.
Yeah.
Again, these questions have kept me up at night, especially of this one. I wanted to speak more about some poisonous agents that I think the general public knows about. Carbon monoxide. I remember watching a movie when I was younger. I don't remember exactly what it was, but there was ambulances outside the person's house and they just passed out inside their home. And the reason was carbon monoxide poisoning. And I remember being as a kid, I'm like, oh shoot, will this happen to me too?
Yeah,
I mean, it's called the silent killer. I'm curious, what makes
Yes.
it so sneaky? What are the common sources? How does it affect our bodies? And what should we
Yeah.
do if we think, how can we protect ourselves against it?
Yeah, carbon monoxide is like a samurai, right? It's like
Mhm.
very like deadly, sneaky, silent. It's basically because it's colorless, it's odorless, it's tasteless. You can't see it, you can't smell it, you can't taste it. Some of these gases, whatever, if you smell like a rotting sulfur smell or like a bitter almond smell, that's never a good sign. That's signs of badness, right? But you know that something is occurring and you can smell it. And carbon monoxide, that is not the case. So people can be poisoned without realizing it's happening, often while sleeping or in closed spaces. And it can cause sudden illness or death before any warning signs appear. This is like when you hear like those people that rent Airbnbs in like foreign countries that don't have carbon monoxide detectors, and like 4 tourists are found dead, or like in a hotel room. I'm sure you've seen the stories, right? Or
Oh my gosh.
or
Well,
everybody's
I have a new
poisoned.
fear now.
Yeah, I mean, so the funny thing is, I have that same fear now that I have a child. So
Yeah.
now that we go, if we rent Airbnbs, I actually bring a portable carbon monoxide detector with me, actually, because a lot of foreign countries don't have that same regulation, like in America, where you have to have the detector. So yeah, that's
That is so good to
add
know.
fear.
Yeah.
Good to know. You can just buy it on Amazon for battery powered. You just take it with you,
Yeah.
and that's it. But yeah, like the classic thing with that is like everybody comes to the ER with the vague complaints from the same household. Like even the dog is sick, right? It's always like the dog is also sick. And that should give you a clue like, oh, I should get a carbon monoxide level. So, common sources. Okay. Winter is the season. Gas, oil, wood furnaces. Nothing you really see in like New York City, but we're talking about like Appalachia or like Midwest or like older homes, right? They use these kind of methods to heat their homes, fireplaces, wood burning stoves. I don't know who has a wood burning stove, but we're getting back into the trad life. People are going backwards. Base heaters, or even like the classic is, the people who want to kill themselves, right? They turn their car on in the garage, in a closed garage, or they block the chimneys or the vents. And that is the way you can actually be exposed to this. It basically renders your hemoglobin not really usable, right? The carbon monoxide binds to the hemoglobin, and that carries oxygen to red blood cells, right? And carbon monoxide binds like 250 times higher affinity than oxygen. So it forms carboxyhemoglobin, and it can't offload the oxygen to the tissues. So your tissues basically can't use oxygen properly, and they starve, and they have tissue hypoxia, which kills the brain, kills the heart. And the dangerous thing is that it's often mistaken for the flu. Like if you come to the hospital, it's like kind of flu-like illness. You feel like headache, you're kind of feeling a little dizzy, right? But then that's mild, and people can actually be misdiagnosed and sent back to their environment of exposure and then be found dead the next day. So the clue is like I said, if multiple people, pets, everything in the same space are developing symptoms pretty much at the same time, this is when you suspect this.
Yeah. One lesson for today is get a carbon monoxide detector, especially when you're traveling.
Yes. I know, for every floor of your house, test
Yes.
it monthly, replace the batteries. But when you travel, because you will see on the news, if you Google it enough, that there are tourists and hotels in Airbnbs that die from carbon monoxide poisoning.
One more thing to keep me up at night.
Yeah.
Well,
Add fuel to the fire.
I know. Well, the next one, you've mentioned this a few times already, is opiate overdose. And we know that it's a huge issue, especially in our country. For those who may not be aware, or probably listening in from a different country, what does this actually mean? What's the usual signs? And how does Narcan actually work?
Okay, so opiate, epidemic is obviously a major problem. We spend like millions and millions of dollars to like try to combat this in the United States, because we created this monster basically, right? By getting people addicted to opiates, and, for even like the management of mild pain. Now we know that, no acute pain. I'm not talking about like a cancer patient. I'm talking about like acute pain, you sprained your back, whatever. Like none of these really require opiates. It should be non-narcotic analgesics. But again, hindsight is 2020. They didn't peddle that, 10, 20 years ago. So here we are. So an opiate overdose occurs when a person takes too much of an opioid drug, which is, commonly, derivatives of like morphine. So oxycodone, hydrocodone, codeine, fentanyl, methadone. And then there's illicit drugs like heroin and fentanyl, right? So some people take fentanyl because they have chronic pain from cancer. They have fentanyl patches, or some people abuse fentanyl to get the effects of an opiate, basically. And the signs and symptoms are You have the triad, basically, is pinpoint pupils. So these small constricted pupils, they have this slow, shallow breathing, or it looks like they're not even breathing at all. They can even look like blue or gray around the lips and fingertips. And they're very drowsy and very unresponsive, difficult to wake up. So this is the triad of, okay, this person is overdosed, which is why most people in now the initiative and even the emergency rooms and everything is if you know somebody has a drug behavior addiction to these specific drugs, or somebody in the house even has a drug problem, you have Narcan readily available because it is the antidote. So it is an opioid antagonist. It reverses the effects of opioids completely. It competes with opioids at that mu receptor, and it basically kicks that opiate off. It's like goodbye and replaces it. Okay. So it basically reverses that respiratory depression, that sedation, and that euphoria that they want, which is why they wake up very annoyed at you because you woke them up from their slumber, but it's either that or they die. Right. So that's how Narcan works. And it works within 1 to 2 minutes if you give it via the nasal spray, which medics in New York City carry, police officers carry, the fire department, like a lot of people carry this. And at home, this is what you get in a Narcan kit if you are a abuse potential or you live with somebody like that. And the effect lasts about an hour, which is shorter than the duration of some of the opioids. So you might have to repeat the dose if after an hour you notice that the Narcan is wearing off, but the drug that they took is still on board. So you might have to repeat the dose. But yeah, so, you spray one dose into one nostril for the Narcan kit. There's also another kit, FZO, that you can inject into the outer thigh. In the hospital, you can give it IV. You redose it if there's no effect. And like I said, it can cause sudden withdrawal symptoms, nausea, vomiting, rapid heart rate. They're agitated. These are not life-threatening. The overdose is life-threatening.
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah.
Thinking of Narcan and all of this antagonists, well, it definitely makes me so thankful of medical technology and modern science, right? Because now we have antidotes and answers to these.
Right.
And I can't imagine, in the past,
Right.
right? Where basically you just wait for your doom. So it's so
Right.
it's so amazing what modern medicine has really provided for us. Well, when it comes to modern medicine, I wanted to take it a step back. We'll do a pit stop in the jungle away from the concrete jungle that we live in. You mentioned previously about Venom. And whenever I think of Venom, all I can think of are snakes. And I must say that's another one on my list of 2 a.m. worries. Even though I live in the middle of New York City. Yeah, briefly, what have been the most common venomous animals that required your care in the hospital?
In New York, no. I mean, there are species of venomous snakes in New York, like a northern copperhead, but they're very uncommon. You're not going to find them in New York City. And the kind of snakes that you might find that escape some snake collector's house is probably going to be like a python or a constrictor, right? Because these are the exotic snakes that people tend to keep. But in Pittsburgh, believe it or not, I did see this quite frequently. So that was the most common thing that I encountered, like a snake bites, hands down. But not so much here. Here, you're pretty safe. That's why you gotta stay in places that are like cold and are frigid. Because you don't get these kind of same creatures.
Yeah. Well, I'm so grateful our street rats aren't venomous.
Yeah. Oh my God. They probably carry more diseases than it. I'd rather take my chance with the snake, I think.
Tired of health fads and fleeting trends? Reprise Health takes wellness back to its roots, back to all natural remedies that have truly stood the test of time. Reprise is a holistic wellness brand bringing the ancient wisdom of traditional Eastern medicine into the modern world. Their daily gummies feature ancient Asian superfoods like ginseng, turmeric, and reishi mushrooms that are proudly sourced from KPC herbs, trusted by acupuncturists and herbalists for over 100 years. Whether to help you rest, focus, de-stress, or sleep, bring centuries of wisdom into your everyday health for 15% off at reprisehealth.com. That's REPRISE health.com with the code FRANZ. That's FRANZ. One-time use and cannot be combined with other codes. Ancient wisdom, modern remedy. What if your routine felt less like a chore and more like a ritual? Rooted in Japan since 1946, Uka Beauty creates everyday practices that remind us beauty isn't just how you look, but how you feel. At the heart of their mission is regenerative beauty, from ingredients that restore biodiversity, to refillable, circular packaging that reduces waste. Their iconic scalp Kanzen brush transforms scalp care into full body relief, easing headaches, boosting circulation, and releasing jaw tension. And with innovative shampoos, nail oils, and serums, Uka restores balance and vitality with timeless Japanese sensibility and craftsmanship. Join the mission of turning care into impact. In collaboration with Rom Spa, you can get 15% off your first order at ukabeauty.com. That's UKAbeauty.com with the code FRANZ. That's FRANZ. One-time use only and cannot be combined with other codes. In regards to Venom, which scares me a lot, I think one thing that really scares me is movie level production.
Oh my God.
Presentations of certain things. Like one is obviously the Anaconda.
Yeah.
But then the other one is more of these historical dramas and movies that I watch. And you just see, scenes of bioterrorism, or even when I guess you're starting out in a new hospital for work, and then you had to do the onboarding videos and guidelines. And one of them, at least for my hospital system, was bioterrorism and preparedness. And I remember that each time I do it, I'm like, this feels so useless. Like, I don't know if this will ever happen. Based on your experience, how likely is it that the risk of bioterrorism happens in our daily lives? And can you explain what bioterrorism is in the first place?
Sure. Bioterrorism is, like that big scary thing that people throw out, like politicians, like, biological warfare is coming or it might happen or this and that. And yes, it has happened in the past and, different places. And it's very scary. Like, again, if you have to deal with it, I think the point is to not be as chaotic and confused, but I feel like that's just hard, right? In the moment, right? When you don't know what you're dealing with, you always have this sense of panic and confusion and chaos, right? So bioterrorism basically is the intentional release or use of biological agents. So bacteria, viruses, toxins to cause death or illness in people, animals, plants for political, ideological, or criminal purposes. So in simpler terms, it's just a deliberate use of germs or a biological substance as weapons to create fear and harm and disruption. And the agents that are chosen for, say, a terrorist attack, they're chosen specifically because they're highly infectious and easy to produce and spread and difficult to detect quickly. So common agents like that would be anthrax or the plague or smallpox or a nerve gas or ricin. These can be airborne and aerosolized, like anthrax has spores, like when the U.S. Postal Service was getting poisoned, the post office poisoning. It can be airborne. They can contaminate the food, the water, person to person, like smallpox. Again, these are eradicated and smallpox is eradicated, but they still have samples of smallpox in laboratories, right? And also with the refusal of vaccinations, now we are seeing things make a comeback. Yeah, so that's basically what bioterrorism is used for. Anthrax, like I said, that U.S. Postal Service poisoning, that refers to the bioterrorism event that occurred, I think in 2001. It was called the anthrax attack, or it was actually called Amerithrax. They got very creative with that. And basically right after September 11th, terrorist attack. So already the world, the US and the city is on edge already. Letters containing powdered anthrax spores were mailed through the post office to US senators and media offices. And these letters spread cutaneous anthrax, inhalational anthrax, causing illness and death. 22 people were infected, 5 died, thousands were placed on prophylactic antibiotic, and postal facilities all over the states had to shut down for decontamination. So, that was investigated. They actually linked it to a microbiologist named Dr. Bruce Ivins. He was this biodefense researcher for the United States Army, but he died by suicide before the trial.
It's kind of like an invisible enemy, right? Of a certain nation where you can't see how fast it's spreading from the get-go and you don't know who you're dealing with.
That's the point, right? Yeah. The point is you want it to spread fastly, but what came out of that is they created this BioWatch and BioShield program. They invested in laboratory readiness, postal detection systems, public health surveillance. So this basically came from that incident. But, biological agents can take hours or days to cause symptoms. So like the fact that you're being attacked, quote unquote, is not immediately recognized, which complicates like telling the public and trying to cause containment, because by the time you even realize that you're being attacked to begin with, it's already spread.
Yeah, it reminds me of when COVID was starting, and
Yes.
when fear is present, there's a lot of misinformation that can also ensue. And I remember there was a point, right, when people were like, "Oh, maybe COVID is maybe our country is trying to get rid of certain portion of the population." Literally, bioterrorism is literally just like movie level
Yeah.
production.
Yeah, it's exactly that. It's just like you have this like very virulent thing that nobody's been exposed to before, and it was rapid, the amount of people coming to the emergency department, and you're kind of like, how do I contain this? What's the extent of the spread? So it's basically on the same track. And there's different categories, right? Like CDC categorizes like category A is the highest priority, easily spread, high death rate, panic. And that's, like I said, anthrax, smallpox, plague. But then you have an emerging pathogen that can be easily engineered for mass spread. So you have like different categories of what they qualify as like the categories for the bioterrorism per the CDC. But yeah, it is fascinating, but very terrifying at the same time.
Yeah, I mean, I feel like the field of medtox is just intriguing and terrifying me completely.
Yeah.
And
Everything is trying to kill you.
I know.
The soil, the land, the sea, right? You learn that everything, there's venom here, there's poison there, there's toxin here. It's like everything's just trying to kill you.
Literally our own world is against
Yeah.
all of us. The world is like, you've heard us enough. It's
Yeah.
our turn. We talked a lot today about different levels of poisoning and overdose, and we talked about carbon monoxide and opiates and even venom and bioterrorism. So, as you can tell, I mean, our listeners cannot tell quite yet, this field of medtox and emergency medicine as a whole is, one, super intriguing and super interesting, but it definitely often deals with a lot of questions and investigations and many times life and death emergencies. I'm sure if the general public is met with it, it's just pure panic and terror. I'm curious, what keeps you inspired in this field that often deals with all these horrors?
I always think about this because I wonder every day when I go to the ER, I'm like, why do I do this? Because it's so hard, right? Like it's busy, it's nonstop. Depending on the day or the time, you don't get a break. It's like 6 hours before you realize you even drank water or went to the bathroom, right? But I think it's because when you step back, you actually feel like you're part of something that makes an immediate, tangible difference, right? In emergency medicine, again, I'm speaking as an ER doc with a toxicology background, your actions literally save lives within minutes. Like you have to make life and death decisions. And I feel that, that at the end of the day, when I go home or I wonder about these things, when I feel like maybe when hopefully I live a long life, but when I'm at the end of my days, I'll feel like, hey, I actually did something for people. I didn't just exist for myself, right? Or like for my, my Instagram or for my whatever, whatever I think is important, me, right? I feel like I actually did try to make a difference in people's lives. And remember, like, especially when you work in New York City hospitals, as you would know, as a nurse, like inner city hospitals, anything like that, a lot of these people, like you are their only interaction with a healthcare provider, the ER doctor, right? Like they don't have primary care. They don't even have insurance, or they're undocumented or, healthcare is universal. Like you can't really look at a human being and be like, you don't deserve to be taken care of. And so, when you're doing things like administering an antidote, performing CPR, identifying a dangerous exposure, and meaning difference between survival and death, the immediacy of that impact is incredibly motivating. It reminds you why you trained for this work. And a real life example of that for me personally was COVID, right? Because everybody was shutting down and all these doctors were doing tele visits and nobody was coming into the office, but not us, not the hospitalists. And we had to be there regardless. And that really proved to me that, all doctors are, and nurses, and everybody has a role and a special role, and they all are very important in their role. But the vitality of role is very limited to very few subspecialties because we learned that firsthand with COVID. And, helping people, problem solving under pressure, helping immigrants, those without healthcare, saving somebody's life. Like all of this is very meaningful. And then you also work together as a team, camaraderie with your PAs, your PCAs, your nurses. It fosters a strong bond between colleagues, from nurses to the paramedics to everybody you work with. So I think tox and emergency medicine, both, they deal with hidden dangers, and being that person who detects, have the ability to neutralize this danger. It gives you a sense of control and purpose in this very chaotic world that we live in, if that makes sense.
Yeah, definitely. I love that so much. I mean, you are definitely a certified Sherlock Holmes and more. But Dr. Raja, thank you so much for this conversation, your generosity with spreading and sharing your knowledge and expertise with us. When I was blueprinting the season, one of the topics that were in my top 5 was really, one of them was toxicology. And I'm like, I have no idea who I can find to speak about this. And then I was going...
And then we sat next together in Syria on a bus, right?
Yes, we did.
Meant to be.
And then I was like, oh, this is it. This is the one. Well, you're right. It's in the midst of the chaos, in the midst of the panic and the fear. It's so beautiful to know that there's people who have, given their lives to studying and training to provide that, even like that glimmer of light, even in seconds when they think that this agent might cost their lives. So you do such amazing work. And Dr. Raja, thank you so much for joining me in today's episode.
Oh, you're welcome. Anything for you.